All right, welcome to the Sound Studio. This is a little tour to show you some things you need to know, some basic operating procedures. Number one, on the speakers, do not touch the speakers, do not change these dials. They are set for a reason, and if you touch them, you will screw everything up. Number two, I'm going to go in here to the recording section of the recording studio. This room works best when you close the door to isolate any outside sounds you don't want to hear. You have a couple cool options here. Number one, you have two microphones. So you have this microphone here. This is an Octava microphone that stays permanently in the studio. And you have a spit guard here. If you don't use the spit guard, you're going to get a lot of nasty plosives from your P's and B's. When people say like peanut butter, it'll sound really weird. So make sure you use a spit guard, but make sure it's not touching or rubbing on the mic itself, or you'll pick up that sound. This here is just another, like an acoustic shield to try to prevent even more vibrations. It's not really necessary in this room, so feel free to just put the mic wherever you want, wherever's comfortable for your talent. If you need them to read something, there should be a mic stand or like a music stand for putting paper on, so you can make them comfortable. Just make sure you have them about, I don't know, 8 to 10 inches from the mic. That would be the ideal location. The closer you get, the more of a proximity effect you'll get, which is an amplification of the bass signal. Okay, a couple things you need to know here. Now these setups, this is subject to change, so you may not, these gray boxes may be gone by the time you use this. I'm hoping they're gone. But basically you have a snake. This runs into the audio interface, which is connected to the computer. Only thing you really need to know is you have channel 1 and channel 2. Channel 1 goes to this mic. Channel 2 goes to this cable. So if you were ever to want to record with two different microphones in the sound studio here, channel 1 and channel 2 would be where those microphones are plugged into. This little unit here is a headphone distributor. It has 4 different outputs, so you could technically have 4 people in the sound studio here with headphones all monitoring their signal live. I only have one set of headphones that come included in the studio, and you can change the volume of the headphone right here. Okay. This monitor, you can just push the power button to turn it on, and what's nice about this monitor is if you're recording ADR, or you're doing Foley for some reason in this room and you want to see what's going on, you can have the person in the control room over there play the video on this monitor and you can follow along. This monitor receives the same signal as the monitor that's up here on the wall. So in reality, we only have 3 different channels. We have the main computer here, receives one like video signal, the main monitor. Then there's a second monitor there, and then the third monitor is shared between this monitor and this monitor. So whatever one of those monitors sees, the other monitor should see as well. There is air conditioning in this room. I recommend you turn it on prior to recording to cool it down. There really isn't a lot right now. I'm working on putting up foam in the studio. There isn't a lot you need to know except that I expect you to put things back where you find them, and that just means that when you pull out microphones or any other accessories that you plan on using in the sound studio, you need to put them back afterwards. I don't want to see people leaving things like hard drives here. Chris Vance, naughty, naughty. So please clean up after yourselves. This device here is a Mackie Universal Control Surface. It's pretty cool. I'm going to have to make a separate video on how to use that, all right? I don't expect you guys to be using that unless you've been trained, so please keep the cover on it, keep it off. Okay, a couple other things you need to know about this sound studio. You have a mic. This is like the talkback mic where you can talk to the person in the recording studio. Feel free to move it to make it comfortable to your height and angle. These buttons turn on the speakers. Channel 1 is the left speaker. Channel 2 is the right speaker. These are the only speakers you will need on unless you're doing a 5.1 surround sound mix. So really don't turn the rest of them on until you're getting into the more advanced audio mixing, all right? Turn this back off. below is the audio interface. Over here, these represent the 4 channels of input. So 1, 2, 3, and 4. Remember what channel 1 is? Channel 1 is the microphone that's in the sound studio. The other one you need to know about is channel 4. Channel 4 is this mic right here, all right? If you need to change the gain, which is not the same as volume, but I'm going to use it interchangeably. If you need to make it louder or softer, you can turn this dial up and down to change the gain on that, okay? Phantom power here should be on for the condenser mic in the studio. Make sure you flip that on. Over here, this is where your headphones plug in. I would just leave them plugged in. And above is the volume. This is going to change the volume output to the speakers at the top and your headphones. If you push it, you can switch between main out, which is the speakers, and headphones. You can see it changing there. So as I push it in, phones and main out. So I can now turn it and I can make it louder or softer depending on which way I turn it. So just make sure if you're trying to change the volume and you can't change the volume, it's probably because you're trying to change the volume of one of the other items, and to get access to the headphones, I'd have to push it, and now I can change the headphones volume, all right? You shouldn't need to really be pushing any of the other buttons. That should be all you need to know, except for the power button is located here. So if the device is off when you use the computer, make sure you turn it on. Here we are on the computer, and I'm going to show you a few things you need to know about using the Sound Studio computer. So let's just jump right in. First thing, I'm just going to close QMix here. Let's say you've logged in and you're unsure of where to start. There's a couple things you're going to need to use. Basically, we're going to be teaching you the program Adobe Audition. That's where we're going to be recording all of our sound into. But you're also going to need to be familiar with QMix. It's this little blue icon with the headphones on it. This is the way we control the audio interface card, the Mode 2, all right? I think if I had just quit it and I click on it, so simulate what happens when you click on it, there you go. So when you click on it, it's going to pull up a window like this, all right? What you need to know and be aware of is that these 4 sliders here represent the 4 audio inputs. So remember, channel 1 is that microphone in the sound studio. Channel 2 and 3 we don't use, but if you were to use them, you would just connect channel 2. For example, I showed you inside the sound studio that there was that extra mic cable laying on the table. You would just plug that in, and that would be on audio channel 2. If you wanted to use something else, you would have to plug it into the back of the audio interface card itself, or into the snake in the sound studio, which is labeled channel 3. Channel 4 is the microphone I'm using right now, which is the microphone that's in the sound studio attached to the table. Okay, so as you can see, my voice has levels that are going up and down here. This slider here represents the output. This is, number 1, how loud the output is and where it's being sent to. You need to know this because there's a lot of things that can go wrong, and there's not always going to be TAs that are available to help you. So this is where you need to pay really close attention. And it's not that complicated. There's only like a few items you need to know. If you don't hear any sound, there's a couple reasons why. So first of all, what happens if I mute the channel I'm using? I'm just going to click mute, and as you can see, the sound just goes away. There's nothing there. Currently, I'm muting channel 1, which is the mic in the sound studio. If I unmute it, now it's also being added to the mix here. So again, you can mute these channels, which is actually really important, because if you don't mute them, let's say you put the headphones on or you're working with the speakers, these mics are going to be active, and that's going to create a feedback loop, because the mics are going to pick up the sound coming out of the speakers, and then that sound is going to come out the speakers, and it's going to pick that new sound up, and it's just going to make this loop where you get this really loud sound called feedback. So to prevent that from happening, I just recommend muting the mics when they're not in use, okay? Now, audio levels. As you can see, the mic that I'm using right now is turned all the way up to 50. And that's because of the type of mic it is. It needs a lot of juice to work. The microphone that's in the sound studio doesn't need anywhere near that much power. You probably want it somewhere in this range. I can't remember. But how do you tell? Well, it also depends on how close your subject is to the mic, and also how loud your subject is. You don't want that volume peaking. So I'm going to try to give you an example of like peaking here and see if you can hear it. Ah! Over peaking, over modulated sound. Look at that raspy, nasty sounding dialogue. So if you're hearing that and seeing visually, look at my wave. Look at the VU meter go up. If you see it go up to close to 0, and then you see that little white line show up, that means it's clipped. There it goes. Now that just resets after a few seconds. Again, though, what if your volume is really low and someone's like further from the mic and they're talking like this? As you can see, the loudest it's getting is like negative 18 dB. What's going to happen is, if you want to make that nice and clean so you can hear in post, you're going to have to add the volume when you're editing, and that's going to create more hiss and noise in your system. So really, you want your dialogue to be, I would say, between -6 and -18. That's where the loudest parts of the speech should be. And I would aim for that to be more near the -6 range. That gives you 6 decibels of headroom, which is like, what if someone was to laugh, ha ha ha, or cough? Hopefully that won't cause it to peak. And sometimes it does. And you need to decide, if you heard that nasty peaking sound, maybe you want to ask them to redo that last statement and just turn the volume, turn the trim down a little bit so that doesn't happen again. So you can hear the trim as I'm turning it down, what it's doing to my volume. It's turning it down. So that's how you adjust the volume on the input. And let me just be really clear here. Trim is what is the most important thing for you to set. And it doesn't matter what other things you set afterwards. This is the input recording volume or gain that you're applying to the microphone. So don't assume that these other things are more important. This is like the most important thing, because even when we switch to different buses and different outputs, which I'll show you later, this is still king. This one is unaffected by what other things you do to it. Okay, so once you've selected nice, appropriate recording levels, the next thing you might want to know is output. This is where the sound's being sent. Currently, it's being sent to analog 1 and 2. That sends the sounds to the speakers in the room. So if I turn the speakers on, I would hear myself right now. I also currently have it set to send the sound to the headphones. I think that's ideal. But sometimes someone might click on headphones, and now the sound is only going to be set to the headphones. And then when they turn the speakers on, no sound will come out of the speakers. And they'll be like, something's wrong, there's no sound coming out of the speakers. Why is there no sound coming out? It's because your output is set to only come out the headphones. All right, so analog 1 and 2, that's where you want to send your sound. And I would just leave it on this all the time. But if someone changes it and you don't hear any sound, it's probably because someone moved it to headphones or some other random analog output, and you're not going to hear that. The next thing you really need to know is bus 1 and bus 2. Bus 1 is what you hear in the room that you're in right now, in the room with the computer in it, in the audio interface, okay? Bus 2 is what the person hears when they put the headphones on in the recording studio, your interview subject. So, bus 1, look at, I have it muted. That means that the computer and this headphones that I'm listening to aren't going to hear channel 1. But if I go to bus 2, it's not muted. That means that the headphones in the sound recording studio, if this person was talking to the mic right now, they would hear themselves. But if they didn't want to hear themselves, I could mute it. And there are times where someone may be performing a song, or maybe they're just doing an interview and they don't want to hear their own voice. They find it distracting. What you can do is say, all right, I want to hear them, but they don't want to hear themselves, so I'm going to just mute them on bus 2. Remember, bus 2 is what they hear in their headphones. But they can still hear you because you're not muted. If you wanted to mute yourself, maybe you have someone like recording a song in there, and you need to talk to somebody that's in the recording studio with you. So let's say you have someone beside you at the computer, and you want to talk to them, but you don't want to distract the person with the headphones on that's recording. Just mute yourself, channel 4, and if they wanted to hear themselves, you can make it so they can hear themselves in there. But they don't hear you talking in here now. So this gives you control over what they're hearing. Are they hearing themselves, you, or both, or none? All right, now bus 1, this is where you change right here. Bus 1 is what you hear. Really important. This is like the main area where students get confused. They're not hearing me, or I can't hear them. So bus 1, bus 2. Keep that in mind, what those two different things do. All right? One other thing to keep in mind is when I switch between bus 1 and bus 2, that trim levels do not change. So do not use trim if someone's saying, my headphones are too loud, or I can't hear myself. Like,
That is nothing to do with trim. Don't use trim to adjust how loud someone hears themselves in the headphones. That's what the volume knob is for on the headphone control in the sound studio, in the recording studio. Or your own headphone volume can be controlled by the audio interface, the buttons on the control. Okay, so don't change these values for perceived loudness. These values here, what matters is these indicators. That's what you want to be watching for the trim level, because as I lower it, you're going to see that my trim level goes down, and that's telling me that it's not loud enough. And if it goes too loud and I'm peaking all the time, I know I need to bring it down a little bit in this range here. Okay. There shouldn't be any other buttons that you really need to work with on this device. Okay, so let's just do a quick recording, and I'll show you how to use Audition in a nutshell. So you click on Audition, it's going to open. When you open Audition, select Multitrack, give it a name. So I'll call this one Recording Time with Tim. Now, where are you going to put it? You're going to put it on your external drive. But because I don't have one connected right now, I'm going to put it on the media drive. So select the media drive. I'm going to create a folder. I'll call it my own name, right? Tim Delatorre. And this would be Recording with Tim. All right, that's where it's going to put the files the recordings that it makes, as well as the project file. I would leave these defaulted numbers, 48,000, 48K is your sample rate, 32-bit. Let's leave that and record in stereo. Hit OK. All right, this can get overwhelming really fast. Let's just make it simple. These are multiple tracks of audio. You're not going to be recording more than probably 2 tracks at a time, most likely just 1. So this left to right indicates time. So what do? Well, look at these 4 buttons here. Which one of these buttons do you think affects where the sound comes from? EQ, sends, effects, or inputs and outputs? You're right, inputs and outputs. Good job. All right. This is where you tell Audition where your sound is coming from and where you want it to go to. This is what's important. Click on that button. This little arrow to the right indicates where the sound is coming in from, and this one where it's going out to. It's going out to master. When it goes to master, it goes to the Mode 2, which then sends it out to wherever you tell it to go out here on the Traveler. So that's where it's headed right now. When I go to, and by the way, when you're on bus 2, the output is 7 and 8. 7 and 8, don't change that. But on bus 1, I would just leave it as analog 1 and 2. And sometimes it just seems to change on its own. So make sure that you check that. So let's say you have someone in the sound studio and you're recording them. Well, that would be an input. So let's change that. Always select mono and channel 1, analog 1. You hit the record button to arm, and then you would just hit the record button down here to start recording. Let's say I want to record my own voice. Now it's hearing me very, lowly from the other room, but now watch what happens when I change this to, okay, what input do I select for the talkback mic in the studio? 4. Now, arm it for recording, and look, those levels are nice and clean and loud. So now what's going to happen is I have 2 channels armed for recording. When I hit record, it's going to record both channels at the same time. So let's just do that. Hi, testing 1, 2, 3. You can see my audio waveform here. It's nice and strong. If I move further away from the mic, though, you can see it gets a lot smaller. That indicates a lower volume recording. You want a nice and strong audio signal, so make sure you also check and keep track of this. If you see it looks small, then you know something's wrong, okay? Now, let's say we just want to record 1 channel. I'm going to hit spacebar or the stop button to stop my recording. All right, and we're no longer recording. Let's unarm this track here, and now we're just going to record with this input up here, which is analog 1. But since I know that there's nobody in that sound studio right now and we can't hear them, I'm going to also go up here and select 4. Now they're both selected as 4, that's fine, but only this channel is armed for recording. All right, so if I just drag my mouse, oh, listen to that. I'm going to zoom out here. Oh, I see what's happening. My screen is stretched. I'm going to just double click up here to make it fit to the screen. There we go. If I go to the end here, I can just hit a new recording. Bang, there it goes. Now it's only recording, and I'm only recording on the track that I've armed, which is the upper track up there, okay? When you're done recording with your interview subject or whatever you're recording, you can, if you would like, trim by clicking and dragging on the ends. You can delete, you can consolidate everything onto one track, however you would like to do it. And then you go File, Export, Multi-track Mixdown. And again, at this point, it's pretty self-explanatory. You want to export the sound out of Audition because you're trying to make it into a file that you can then take into like Adobe Premiere to edit with. So File, Export, Multi-track Mixdown, and the entire session. This is where you can select what type of, first of all, what the file name is going to be. Recording Time with Tim, Mixdown.wave. Okay, I'm fine with that. Ooh, where's it putting it? Random rubbish? Let's not put it there. I'm going to put it in Recording Time with Tim. I'm going to create a new folder, and I'm going to call this one Exports, okay? Hit Save. Now it's going into my Recording Time with Tim Exports folder. What format is it recording in? Is it creating the file in? WAV, PCM, or AAFF. Either one of those are going to have the same effect, so I would recommend you select one of those two. You do not want one of the other ones. All right, just make sure your settings look correct. They look correct to me, 48K, 24-bit. Again, we record in 32-bit float and we export in 24-bit. So if you're like, wait a minute, I thought we started recording the session in 32-bit. Don't worry about that. 24-bit is the standard that we use for exporting and all audio recordings. But because Audition can record in 32-bit, I choose to do that. It's going to mix down the entire session. It's going to create a master stereo file. Don't worry about that. Open file after export. No, I don't want you to do that. Hit OK. Boom, it's done. Open up Finder, which is how you browse your computer. Whoops. Browse to your media drive. Tim Delatorre. Recording with Tim. Recording Time with Tim. Looks like it made a folder inside of a folder, which is normal. I didn't need to create that folder. It was going to create that folder for me based on the name of the project. Inside the folder that Audition created, you're going to see a bunch of folders that I didn't create. I only created, you just saw me create the exports folder, and there's the WAV file. It also creates a PUC file. That's just something that Adobe products do with sound files. You can disregard that file, you don't need it, but what you do need is the WAV file here. As you can see, it's a file that's 9.4 megabytes. So if you look at the PUC file, it's 389 kilobytes, so much smaller. So you want to make sure you're going for the large WAV or AIFF file. And then you just copy that. If it's on your hard drive already, you're good to go. You can just open up your Premiere Pro project, drag it in, and your recording is now in your editing software. If you ever needed to reopen your Adobe Audition session file, that's what this is. So let's say we were to quit Adobe Audition, and I'm going to say, yes, I want to save. Let's say I wanted to start a backup right where I was last time. I would just double click on this Adobe Audition project file. It opens, and you can see once it's there, it's the exact same position I was before. Everything's ready to go. I'm going to quit. I don't think you need to know anything else other than this folder here. It puts in all the raw files that I actually recorded. If for some reason you lose your export, you should have this folder. It should have your original recordings in it, but any trims that you made or deletions or anything won't be, it'll just be the entire audio file for each. So for example, remember I did 2 recordings. First recording, I recorded 2 channels. Second recording, I only did 1 channel. And the PUC files, again, you can just delete these or ignore them. Sometimes I find it easier to sort by list view and then switch to kind. And you can see now it puts all the PUC files on the top and all the WAV files on the bottom, or if you click on kind again, vice versa. So, okay, one more thing I need to show you, and that's how to use the reservation system for the sound studios, all right? So, once you go to the Angwin Film TV forum, you can click on the See More button here to find the link for the Sound Studio and Thesis Studio reservations. If you don't have Facebook, then just email one of the teachers or TAs, and they'll be happy to provide you the link. Click on the link, and it takes you to teamup.com, but a special site that pulls up our reservation system here. All right, as you can see, we already have somebody reserving the Sound Studio tomorrow at 8 p.m. It looks like it's Daniel Moore with Daniel Newport. It looks like he has it only reserved for 1 hour. So let me show you how you can make reservations. Just click, let's say that we want to use it tomorrow at 10 a.m. I'm going to click at the 10 a.m. section. I'm going to say Tim De La Torre. And if you want, I could even say like interviewing Jamie De La Torre, his wife. And let's say we want to interview for an hour and a half. And this is where it's important to select the right calendar. And that means that you need to select the Sound Studio 1 calendar. Hit save, and it'll be the correct color. So it looks like when Daniel did this, he didn't realize that you can select which calendar you can do it with by the color. So just make sure you do that, because we use the same calendar system for reserving other things like the thesis bays and making general announcements. Okay, so that's how simple it is. If you need to change something, let's say you find out like that you have to reschedule your appointment, you can just click and you can just reschedule that, and it updates it accordingly. If you hear audio doubling, and that basically means like an echo in your headphones or on the speakers, what that means is that you have the microphone in the sound studio or in the recording studio, you have it not muted. So it's armed, or at least it's listening to the sound, and that sound is being sent out your speakers and your headphones. So what happens is when you play sound like music out of your speakers, that gets picked up by the microphone, and it just creates this doubling effect. It's very similar to what happens when you get feedback, but it depends on a bunch of different situations whether you're going to get feedback or audio doubling. So if you experience any of those issues, I would recommend going into QMix and muting your channels for bus 1, which is what you'll hear in the sound studio. So if you don't hear any audio, just a couple things to keep in mind. Quickly just look through and check the cabling, any physical connectors, make sure that they're not loose. Again, keep in mind where the sound should be coming from. If you're not hearing any sound from the mic in the sound studio, just check to make sure it's plugged into input 1. You can also just check on the back of the Mo2 to make sure input 1 is connected. Maybe you don't need to do that first unless someone came in ahead of you and has unplugged things, which shouldn't happen, but that's something you should check from time to time. The other thing that is easier to check is just to make sure the phantom power is on. That's the little plus 48 volt switch on the bottom of the Mo2 unit. Just make sure that's flipped to on. That provides power for the mic that's in the sound studio. Condenser mics need power to operate, and that power is called phantom power, and it's 48 volts. So if you have phantom power off, you're not going to hear anything. Check your gain levels, your trim levels. Make sure gain and trim I'm using those interchangeably. Just make sure that those are set properly in QMix or on the front dial of the Mo2, because if it's turned down too far, you won't hear anything. Also, in Adobe Audition hardware preferences, make sure the Mo2 Traveler is what your audio is being sent to. If it's sent to internal sound or something else, you may not experience your expected results. So make sure that the Mo2 is currently selected as your main audio device. Sometimes that can change depending on if the Mo2 gets turned off when a certain program starts up or not. Sometimes just closing the program and restarting it while the Mo2 is on will solve that as well. The last thing to just check is making sure that in Adobe Audition you have armed and set the correct input for the track that you want to record to. So again, what microphone is it that you're trying to record from? What input is that selected at? If it's 1, it should be inside the sound studio. If it's 4, it should be in the control room. So make sure that you've got the correct input selected and armed before you try to record. That should be a nutshell of using the recording studio.